Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the last session of this amazing seventh Time Use Week titled Building a New Global Agenda. This week has been full of sessions and roundtables with more than 80 invited speakers dedicated to rethinking our time. And for this last day of the week, we have two sessions that have been organized focusing on time use from a research perspective. Specifically, this first morning's session is dedicated to how have habits changed in the European society due to lockdown. As it is well known, our lives have radically changed since the coronavirus outbreak in the beginning of 2020. Lockdowns, quarantines, social distance, and telework have been a part of our daily lives since then. It has been a truly exceptional situation that has changed our lives, our habits, the way we work, and the use of our time. And in this context, multiple research studies have emerged trying to explain, trying to make sense of what was and what is still happening and and how is this impacting our lives. So in this sense, the aim of this morning's session is to present 4 research studies from different backgrounds, different disciplines, regarding the impact of the pandemic in our habits. Our first invited speaker is Daphne Advent. She's a senior researcher manager in social policies unit at Eurofound and co-author of the study that she will be presenting today, titled Living, Working, and COVID-19. This study from Eurofound aims at analyzing the immediate impact that the COVID has had on the way people in Europe live and work. Our second invited speaker is Laura Gershwin. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at London Business School, who will be presenting today the study titled Coronavirus, Helping Organizations and Employees Cultivate an Agile Work Culture. This study from London Business School and Harvard Business School aims at analyzing how the pandemic has affected organizations and employees. Till Ronenberg is our third invited speaker, and he's a professor at the Munich Center for Neurosciences in Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich. He will be presenting today the study Global Corona Survey, which from a neuroscientific perspective analyzes how lockdown and shelter in place have changed our sleep and social jet lag. And last but not least, our fourth invited speaker is Cristina Sanchez, an associate professor at University of Girona, who will be presenting the results of the survey on time use during lockdown in Catalonia, a study elaborated by the Opinion Studies Center of the Catalan government. Thank you very much to all 4 speakers for your time and your availability to present the results of your research here today in this last day of the Time Use Week. It is a real pleasure to have all of you with us today. Before beginning the session, just a quick reminder to our audience that you can use the chat that you have on the right-hand side of the screen throughout the entire session to pose questions to our speakers. And since I don't want to steal any more time from the speakers, I give the word to Daphne Advent to present Eurofound's study, Living, Working, and COVID-19. Thank you. Daphne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna, and good morning to everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. No, that's the wrong one. This is always the biggest challenge of these online events, but here we go. Very good. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak at your very interesting conference. As Anna already said, I work at Eurofound, and we're an EU agency responsible for gathering and sharing knowledge about improving living and working conditions in Europe. Let me start by saying that my habits, since we're going to talk about how our habits have changed during lockdown have certainly changed. I'm working remotely. We were talking about this with the group this morning, and I must admit that getting up early is a habit that I have changed. But nevertheless, I'm super excited to be able to be here with you today. So as Anna already mentioned, the COVID pandemic has had an unprecedented impact on living and working conditions across the EU. And for my presentation, I'm going to use data from our online survey to highlight some changes in time use that have taken place during the pandemic. But before presenting some results on teleworking, on work-life balance, on time spent on other activities, I would like to start by introducing our study. So we came up with this idea of the living, working, and COVID-19 online survey in March to capture the immediate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And by May, we had completed the first round and had published first results. And then in July, we fielded a second round. And on the basis of these two rounds, so one round in April, and that was actually during a time when many countries were in lockdown, and then a second round in July when many countries had actually begun exiting lockdown, not knowing that a second wave was upon us at that stage. We wrote a report, and that was published at the end of September. And on the link in this presentation, you can find all the publications that we have produced to date from the survey, as well as a data visualization tool that allows you to play with the data. If you're interested in obtaining the data, please get in touch with us and we'll make the necessary arrangements. So our survey is about, covers issues like well-being, work and telework, living conditions, and the financial situation. And I wanted to say that normally at Eurofound, we do face-to-face random probability surveys, surveys that take a long time to prepare. And so this COVID-19 survey is really very difficult, very different from our traditional surveys. By going online and with snowballing methods and social media ads, we were able to very quickly reach many respondents. In fact, we got over 60,000 completed questionnaires in the first round and over 25,000 in the second. The questionnaire in round one was much shorter than in round two. In round one, it was 8 minutes. And as I said, it was fielded in the midst of lockdown, when people presumably also might have had more time. For the second round, we added questions about support measures, about online learning, and about quality of work. And this survey took longer to complete, so it was 13 minutes. We tried to explain the difference in response by the fact that the second survey was longer, that perhaps there was a bit of survey fatigue, but also, as I said already, that the situation had changed and life temporarily had returned to normal. What we also did on the survey is we asked people whether we could recontact them for a second round. And that way we were able to obtain panel data from both rounds from 13,000 respondents. And as I said, it's a non-probabilistic survey, but by using ex-post weighting, we are able to at least replicate the population structure by age, by education, and degree of urbanization, and that way to provide meaningful information about the impact of COVID-19 on people's lives and working conditions in the European Union. The survey has been a great success for Eurofound. We've got many people interested in our results, and so I'm happy to share these with you. So as I think we've already said, really one of the biggest consequences of the pandemic is that many people, well, at least those that could and that kept their job, I've heard the word lopsided revolution being used a couple of days ago, but anyhow, many people started to work from home during the pandemic. This wasn't quite the case before COVID. At least in Europe, but really throughout the world, teleworking wasn't very common. As you can see on this slide, there are large differences between the 27 EU member states, but on average, 65% of the respondents to our survey had never teleworked before. During the pandemic, it became really the customary mode of working for many employees, with 45% of our respondents reporting to be working from home during the pandemic. The survey also shows that in the future, after the pandemic is over, 65% would like to work from home at least 65%. No, at least several times a month. Apologies. It's early. Our survey also found that 37% of women against 31% of men worked only from home. So not in combination with going to the office, but really only working from home. And close to half of young women and mothers of children aged 12 and to 17 reported this. So how does this upsurge in telework link to work-life balance? The increase in telework has put a strain on workers with children who were suddenly trying to educate their children from home while also working. And work-life conflicts escalated as people were doing this, as people were teleworking, with mothers of small children often bearing the brunt of the impact. This slide shows the work-life balance scores for men and women with young children from round 2 of our survey, so from the July round. And as you can see, women score less well than men on 4 of the 5 work-life balance measures. We can safely say that the increased concentration of activity in the home has had a greater impact on women than it has on men. And that's also evident from this slide that shows the hours spent by men and women doing housework, that's the graph on the left, and the hours spent caring for children, the graph on the right, again during round 2 of the survey. And what you can see, more or less irrespective of the situation, women spend more hours doing unpaid work than men. And although this was always the case, the hours spent doing homework seem to have increased more for women than they did for men. And so when we look at what this increased burden means in terms of having time for other activities, we see a disbalance between men and women. And this disbalance is not so much in training or education, which is what younger people tend to spend more time on. But when it comes to activities like sports, culture, or leisure, the survey shows that women, and particularly those aged 35 to 49, spend less time doing this than men. On this not so pretty graph, apologies, we see furthermore that also irrespective of their employment status, this is the case. So women spend less time in sports, culture, or leisure activities. And finally, in this context, the survey shows that women with young children spend 6.5 hours on average doing sports, culture, or leisure, compared to 11 hours for men. So these are interesting results. I must say, I am not a time use researcher, and I hope this kind of information contributes to the time use debate. But what I wanted to end my presentation on is really what the impact of this could be on mental well-being during COVID. And as you can see on this slide, there's really no doubt that the pandemic has had a huge impact on people's mental well-being. And what we've done is we've used the WHO5, the World Health Organization, mental well-being index to gauge people's moods over the previous 2 weeks. And the index consists of 5 statements and goes from 0 to 100. And a score of less than 50 would indicate that a person is at risk of depression. Although between April and July, so when in April countries were mostly in lockdown, July they were reopening, mental well-being levels improved. We see that scores have remained lower for young people, for women, and for the unemployed. And what's important, I think, is that we need to consider what the impact of teleworking and care responsibilities has been on people's mental well-being. And from what I've shown today, it would appear that women are paying a higher price. But people's mental well-being, of course, also depends on many other factors. It depends on their employment status, and I've broken down on this slide for men and women the scores by employment status, by whether they have children in the household, and by age. So it depends on these kinds of factors and also on other socioeconomic factors. And I think it's the intersectionality of these factors that we need to examine to better understand what is going on, what the impact of the pandemic is on how we use our time, how we can use our time, and data from this e-survey provides this kind of detailed information in this particular setting. And so really ending on this note, thank you very much for your attention. We will be preparing a 3rd round of the survey in February 2021. So in a couple of months, we will go into the field again to see how things are developing. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Daphne. You actually described much of our lives during since March, and since then still what's happening. So thank you very much. If you think what we can do is that we can reserve questions for the end. So once we have heard all speakers, so those of you that are listening and are thinking of questions, go ahead and just post them on the chat that you have available, and we will I will translate them or tell them to the speakers at the end of their presentations. So following up, we have our second invited speaker, Laura Gershwin. She will be presenting the study, as I mentioned before, the study titled Coronavirus: Helping Organizations and Employees Cultivate an Agile Work Culture. So Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are zooming in from. I will also share slides, and as always, it's a little bit tricky, so please bear with me while Okay, can everyone see my slides? Great. So once again, good morning, and of course, thank you for inviting me to this amazing event. In this presentation, I will be speaking of some of my ongoing research over the past months, conducted with several different organizations and in several different countries, one of them being also Spain. And so, let me see. Okay, so I think I'll start by saying that on the whole, the pandemic tells 2 different stories of people's experiences with working from home. On the one hand, there are those of us who feel that time is scarce, that we have too many things to do and just not enough time to do everything that we want to do. We're trying to juggle our work and our family, and for some of us, maybe even be an educator to our kids. On the other hand, for others, time feels too rich. They're bored, they have too much time on their hands, and they miss the social connection and interactions that they have outside this forced working from home experiment. And of course, you also have the people in between who enjoy being at home and in their PJs and not having to engage in small talk or commuting. But even for them, the lack of interaction and diversity in the day can start to feel overwhelming. And that makes sense because your experience of time often depends on how many contextual changes your brain encodes, whether it's environmental, emotional, or psychological changes. And indeed, the pandemic, or, again, as I like to call, and many of us call it, this force from home experiment that we have been in, all of us nowadays, has affected how we spend our time. And there's emerging research with 3 million users that found that indeed we are spending our time differently, that the workday is longer by as much as 45 minutes, and that you are sending and receiving more emails than before. And most often those emails are sent outside what we call regular work hours, which of course tends to place additional challenges and burdens on maintaining healthy work-life balances. And on the next slides, I'll be presenting some of my research conducted over the summer, the first one being with employees from Barcelona City Council, where we find that employees have moved away from their ideal time spent on active leisure and time spent with their friends and family. So a decrease of about 38 minutes during a typical day, and almost an hour less socializing with friends and family. While they've also experienced spending more than ideal time on passive leisure, such as sitting or watching TV, also more time than ideal on household chores and caretaking responsibility. And there is also, as has been shown in Daphne's work, this tends to place more burden on women and particularly mothers. But the thing is that in the same survey, we find that the way we spend our time does matter for happiness. And people who have managed to spend time socializing with friends and family also report greater happiness, while those who spend more time on necessities such as chores and caretaking, they tend to report lower happiness. However, people do in general want to be home and don't want to spend time stuck in traffic, commuting for long hours. Autonomy over when and where we work is actually often a desired benefit for many of us. This is not surprising given that research tells us that autonomy is a fundamental human need. But even in the best of times, before COVID, people struggled with blurred boundaries, in part due to technology perpetuating this always-on mentality. And what the pandemic has done is accentuate this cost, least of which is the blurring of the boundaries that typically helps us to separate our personal from our professional life. Other things have also happened, such as the removal of formal structures that used to separate work from non-work, such as even the commute. So what can people do? Well, one solution in ongoing research that I've seen being beneficial is what I call time crafting. And time crafting is simply put intentionally setting desired temporal boundaries. For instance, making sure that you block time to spend time with friends and family, setting breaks during the day, blocking time for uninterrupted work or even uninterrupted leisure so that you reap the benefits of those hours. Communicate your availability, but also your non-availability when you're not available to work, which means just respecting each other's time. And setting work and non-work hours rituals, by which I mean having a start of the day routine, but also an end of the day routine that helps you mentally dissociate and disconnect from work at the end of the day. And before I go to the next slide, I want to pause and say that we've also done some qualitative research to understand what are those who time craft actually experience. And here are some of the quotes that we have to contextualize this time crafting construct. So the low time crafters, those who were not engaging in this intentionally setting temporal boundaries, they say things like, even lunchtime, I would work. It's probably one of my faults, really, that I do end up working through it. I work through lunch, I work through breaks, but lunchtime didn't really exist. So what we see in this quote is the lack of boundaries creation. By contrast, when we look at quotes from those who were time crafting, apologies for that, we hear things like, it was really important for me from day one, even though the volumes of work were really, really small, it was still there was value in having a schedule and making sure that they're completing tasks on time. So having that structure helped them to cope with even high or low volumes of work. A concrete example of time crafting is what we call pro-time, which stands for proactively crafting your work time. And pro-time is the idea of setting aside each day for 4 days, 2 hours of protected time to play. And by play, I mean use your unique skills and strengths to get to those important yet non-urgent tasks that often get pushed aside. On the 5th day, you plan when and how you will spend that time. And planning is really important since the more specific we are in, planning is really important since we tend to overestimate how long things change, how long tasks tend to take us to finish. So making sure that you have a 30 minutes on a weekly basis when you decide when you're going to engage in pro time and what you are going to do is really important to make you and help you follow through with your plans. And the screenshot on this slide is actually from research that we conducted with a global organization over the summer. So during the pandemic with employees who were working from home. And it took about 6 weeks. And in this pilot, as you can see on the slide, it's been all over the world from the US to Pakistan, to the UK and the northern countries. And over 6 weeks, half of the employees engaged in pro time and half just went about their usual working from home rituals. And after 6 weeks, what we saw is that employees in the pro time group reported a 9% increase in self-reported performance and a 6% decrease in burnout. And in fact, as a result of this research, we are now working with this company and the local leaders to make pro time a company-wide policy that would allow everyone to engage in pro time on a regular basis, and therefore start to change the way work gets done from a reactive way of being to a more proactive and engaged working. And I like to end by saying that pro time can be important beyond your work time and start to think about having protected, uninterrupted time for other things in our life that matter, such as leisure, such as family time, or even time for hobbies that we know from research helps to maximize happiness and productivity. And in fact, some of the employees I've been speaking with about pro time have said that they actually have benefited from having this protected time for leisure and just things that normally would be in their calendar if they were at the office, such as taking time for lunch without the associated guilt of having to work through lunch. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to any questions about any of the research or beyond this research that I present. Thank you.
And for presenting the results of the study, which are very, very interesting. So we have a couple of questions for the audience. I know I said that we would wait till the end, but since we already have people asking questions, I think it's a good idea to maybe stop here and give you two of the questions that that we've received regarding these two past presentation. So the first question is for Daphne, and the question is, well, let me read it directly exactly what the question says. It says, the impact on mental health does not seem to correlate directly with the magnitude of the pandemic in the different countries. And basically the question is, have you looked at factors correlated with the mental health indicator that you used?
And your microphone.
Okay, I was still listening to the question. Apologies. Have you finished the question?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. Well, to tell you the truth, we have started to look. The report was published at the end of September that provided really an overview. And as I said, there's a rich amount of data in there for us to look further. And I also agree that there's many factors that influence mental well-being. And this survey is in no way trying to make any causal links. It's not possible to do that. We do have the panel data that we will be analyzing more closely, where we can follow up the respondents over time. And so hopefully by the time we've done a third wave and a fourth wave, we will have some longitudinal information that allows us to track some of these developments. But yeah, a concrete answer is that there's so many factors that play a role here that I need to be cautious when I make these statements. We do see, when we look at life satisfaction, when we look at happiness, but also when we look at the more specific scores from the WHO5, we see different patterns. So we see for some groups that scores remained relatively stable. And as I said, for young people, it's also, I think Laura referred to it, this sense of not being able to do what you would normally do, not being able to meet your friends, not being able to go to your university, that has had this huge impact. But also a lot of young people lost their temporary types of jobs. So there's, again, different factors that impact their well-being. A tremendous important area for us to study very carefully at this stage and to monitor. I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it does answer the question, and as you were saying, it's absolutely, I mean, it's a very critical situation, mental health. For sure, there's going to be some impact. So yeah, I absolutely agree that we have to keep monitoring and see what the impact has been. So the question that we've received for Laura is basically, what is the employer's role? So in this proactively crafting one's work time, what is the role of the employer? Because at least in Spain, and this is something that I'm adding myself, but in Spain we've had a debate regarding, so what are the employer's obligations regarding working time? How must the employer control workers' working time to guarantee that they don't work beyond their working time? And we have recently two employers' obligations. One is to register working time. So each company in Spain has the obligation to make its workers register the beginning and the end of their working day. And then we have the right to disconnect. So the employer has to adopt specific measures to guarantee that workers disconnect during their working day. So at the end of their working day. So basically, the question was more general, but I added the Spanish perspective. Is what is the employer's role here? Is this something that the employer has to impose, or is it more aimed at workers?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for the question. I think that's a really important question, and one that is definitely ongoing. And I think it has been amplified by the pandemic, this necessity to move away from just measuring number of hours that people work to really focusing on the quality of work, and leaders taking a role that is not just about managing workload and making sure that you get the work done, but also making sure that your employees are, as you said, disconnecting from work, managing this work-life divide. And I think the challenges are, one of the big challenges is how do you navigate this tension between imposing things which impede on people's autonomy to do the things that they want, which we know autonomy is really important. So I think there has to come from higher up that pro time, so the time crafting strategy that I presented, it has to be respected by everyone in the company and recognized. And, if someone has that in their calendar, that you respect that time. And if it doesn't come from the top, if it doesn't come from the leaders to set those norms and to set new work-life balance norms, it's really hard for employees to say, I have this and I want to do it. And the reason I'm saying this is with a company that we worked on the pro-time intervention study over the summer, it really came from the leaders realizing that they need to do something and actually encouraging employees to set that time. And even then, it was hard to change those habits of interrupting, of reaching out, of saying, yes, I know you're doing pro time right now, but this is more important. And so the thing is, when everything is important, nothing is actually important anymore. When everything is urgent, nothing is urgent anymore. So I think, first of all, employers have a big responsibility here to realize that they need to help employees not just manage workload, but managing the disconnect. But the challenge, of course, is to make sure that you're not imposing on the autonomy of people by monitoring them, because that takes away them actually engaging in the work because they want to. So it's an ongoing conversation, yes. And the strategy that I presented is an individual one, but I think it points to the need of organizations also developing new ways of working, which right now are ongoing, yes. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, perfect. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much. So while we are waiting for other questions from the audience that I'm sure that will be coming, let me give the floor to Till Ronenberg to present the study regarding global corona survey. So Till, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Let me say that I think what the Time Use Society is doing is extremely important, because one of the next big changes in the life of humans after Darwin and after Einstein will be trying to make sense of how we live with time and with our temporal biological needs. Let me point out right from the beginning that I'm now changing to biology. There are two very interdependent aspects to a human social life, and that one is the social life we've just heard about. That means employees and employers and children and family and home and office and so forth. But there's also the interdependent biology of sleeping and waking, which I will talk about. And I'll start now. Maybe I should, can everybody see that? Can everybody see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So the timing of our biology is controlled by something that's in the brain. It is called the master clock. It's a biological clock that looks out into the world and reacts practically exclusively to the signals of light and darkness. Now, in nature, that would mean of day and night. Light and darkness in modern times, as I will come back to, do not necessarily mean day and night, but it certainly still is the light and the darkness. And especially the big contrast between light and darkness that sets the clock in the brain. Now, the clock in the brain is not a single clock. It is, of course, comprised of many cells in many neurons that come together to make the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock. But the fact that cells can make biological timing within their structures is true throughout the body. So practically every cell in our body and every organ in our body, all the tissues have their own clocks, and they do not listen to the light and darkness from the outside, but they listen to the signals that come from the master clock, which itself is connected to the outside. Now, there's a lot of biology going on, which I'm not going to go into, but a lot of biology also always means that you will have individual differences, and there always is a Gaussian, a normal or a quasi-normal distribution. And one of these distributions is that you have early people. Those are the red ones at the top, the larks. You have intermediate people, which I have called the doves because they didn't have any bird names. And then you have the owls at the bottom, who are in their timing much later than the rest of the population. So you have very early types, intermediate types, and late types, but they are not classes or type categories. Categories are just made in artificially because it's really like body height or foot size. It is a continuum, and therefore it's a nice distribution, which is typical for many genes being responsible for the biological timing. Now let me tell you that things have changed from pre-industrialized rural situations on the left, which we have as a species lived under most of our existence, and that is bright daylight because we're working outside, and practically no light at night because we didn't have electrification. And under these conditions, we fell asleep sort of sometime after sunset. In the winter, of course, more than in the summer, because the nights are longer in the winter if you live not at the equator. And we woke up somewhere around dawn. That was our sleeping situation, and the left bottom graph shows bars for the sleeping times. Now our life has changed drastically because we are hardly ever outside anymore, and that means that we get about 1,000-fold less light than we did when we worked outside. So we have reduced the light that we get during the day, but we also have reduced the darkness that we get during the night because we are using electric light, artificial light. So clocks had to cope with the fact that they get a much weaker signal from the outside, namely less light during the day and more light or less darkness during the night. And most clocks, except for the very early types, have changed their phase position towards the light-dark cycle, and they had to become much later in order to be able to synchronize to the 24-hour day. This has created a weekly structure, which is completely new, and it is a consequence of industrialization. And that is, we get too little sleep during the work week, and we try to sleep in and sleep longer, and most of us later during the weekend. And this situation has created something which we have called social jet lag. And you see here, on the left, you see a typical, very strong social jet lag where people on work-free days, that's the green bars, sleep much later and also longer than on work days. And you can measure the difference in this behavior, and this difference is social jet lag. It's practically the dictatorship of the alarm clock which makes the social jet lag. And only 13% of the population do not suffer from any social jet lag. Now, of course, this was all introductory, and we now come to the global survey that we've, and I will try to play this now. Can you still see it? Please say yes, somebody. So we did a worldwide survey, yes, asking people what they did before the pandemic, before the lockdown, and what they did in the lockdown. And we've asked many questions, and I only will, at the moment for this talk, will concentrate on the questions concerning the sleep-wake behavior. And they are very, very interesting, and they brought new insights to us who have researched human circadian rhythms for quite some time. So initially we had about 11,000 respondents, and the final population was 7,500 respondents coming from many different areas of the globe. And the time restriction that we call the lockdown social restrictions were about 32 days into the time restriction, so they were quite solidified and consolidated. And let me walk you through these main figures, which I will be lingering with for the rest of my talk. What you see on the horizontal axis is, in every one of them, what we have done before the lockdown, of course, reported retrospectively. that coincides very well with what we already know, what people usually have done. And then on the vertical axis, you see the same quality. In this case, it is mid-sleep on free days. And this mid-sleep on free days is an assessment of the chronotype, which I've already introduced. And what you can see in these figures is how this quality changed from pre-social restrictions to in social restrictions. And you can see that the chronotype changed, became a bit later, but it doesn't change very much dependent on the pre-state, because most of the population is moving towards a later time, as we've already discussed, but none of them move later in form of, if they have been very early, they move much later and so forth. That is different to when we look at sleep duration. And here you can see that the slope starts to really get away from the one-to-one relationship. Those who got much less sleep than normal, than the normal distribution, gained much more sleep during lockdown. And those who already slept quite long didn't add much more sleep on average over the week. And this allows us to actually pin down that the average sleep needs, where people do not change their habits, is 8.5 hours and not the 7 to 8 hours that we have thought of so far to be sort of the median of human sleep need. The third factor we looked at is social jet lag. And the more social jet lag you had, the more you reduced under lockdown your social jet lag. And here we see that people who suffered from 20 minutes of social jet lag actually did not bother to change their life habits anymore, so that we can say only 20 minutes of social jet lag is a tolerable size that we can live with. But these graphs show you something that we've never seen before, and that is we have the possibility of getting at the real numbers of what people can tolerate or what people need. Now, this is much faster because now you know how to read these figures, and I will concentrate on the lower XY clouds. And you can see that chronotype in very young people did change depending on what you were before lockdown, because the slope is less, deviates a lot from the one-to-one relationship. And it's clear that the very young people have changed their habits, their timing habits, more than the other age groups. Now, concerning sleep duration, you see that throughout the ages, there is about an 8.5 hour sleep duration, but the sleep need, as we've known, in young people is larger than in older people. And that is very nicely depicted here in these points of inception of the one-to-one relationship, where we can say this is the potentially ideal sleep duration for at least the average of that age group. And here you see what happens in the different age groups concerning social jet lag. And again, it is around 20 minutes of social jet lag that can be tolerated. In younger people, it's slightly less. In very much in retired people, it's even less. But that is not due because they can tolerate less, but it's because they don't have such discrepancies between what they have to do during the work week and during the weekend. So all in all, we get to real numbers of estimating what people need in their biological timing. And with that, I would like to thank Maria Korman and Vadim Tacek and Luisa Pilz and Katja Reis, who were the main drivers of this survey. And I am happy to answer questions. And for that, I'll probably stop sharing the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Till. That was very interesting. I'm from a legal perspective, so this was very new to me, but very, very interesting to really understand what is our what are our biological needs regarding sleep habits. So that was very interesting, and I'm sure that we will have some questions coming up. And if not, at the end, I have some few questions to ask you. So let me give the floor now to Cristina Sanchez. That, as I mentioned, she will be presenting the survey on time used during lockdown in Catalonia. Cristina, the floor is yours.
Good morning, bon dia a tothom. He de començar dient que aquest estudi l'hem...
I just wanted to start by pointing out that this is a joint study I carried out with Albert Sabaté at the University of Girona. And the study question was, what has changed with the opportunity, quote unquote, if you like, afforded by the fact that the Catalan population was forced to go into lockdown, generally speaking, of course, leaving aside essential workers who still had to continue to leave the home to work. The Catalan Institute of Women commissioned this research. And what we felt was that this situation provided a kind of laboratory to analyze what the changes entailed and how they were taking place. It's a general survey on time use, but there's a significant part of it that's about how household work and paid work were allocated. So we wanted to see the gender breakdown of work in households in Catalonia. So what was the answer? What were our findings? If we look at shared responsibility between both genders, that opportunity afforded by lockdown has failed to materialize. In fact, the impact has been small, and if anything, it has not gone that much in the direction of reducing differences between men and women in households in Catalonia. It's still a sexist pattern, although there has been a change that is rated differently by men and women. One of the most interesting things about this survey is the difference in the perception of reality of different people. That said, I do have to point out that we haven't surveyed, or we haven't been able to identify who were members of the same household. So we haven't surveyed comparing men and women in the same household. But we have surveyed men and women in very similar circumstances. What I'm going to be describing is situations in households where both partners are working. What we weren't able to differentiate was whether they were working at home or from home or outside the home. That referring to paid work, that is, of course. We couldn't go into that kind of detail because we didn't have the right sample size for it. So the first thing we asked was, prior to lockdown, and we asked this of both men and women, separately, of course, each person answered individually. Before lockdown, were you doing household and family care work? And of course, the kind of housework and how housework and care work happens in each home is very, very different. So each person individually interpreted what it meant. Well, men only reported taking part in household work and care work in 32% of cases, whereas women reported it in 66% of cases, which means that the baseline was a completely different one. there was a complete gender difference between men and women in Catalan households. And this is something we knew from other surveys, both occasional and regular, on how housework is shared and on how much time is allocated to it. But the interesting bit about this survey is the next question. Has this kind of dedication changed as a result of lockdown? Have your time uses changed? Has the amount of time you're spending on housework and family care work changed for you with lockdown? So once again here, we're going to see completely different narratives for men and women. For 33% of women, there was no change, but only 17% of men reported no change. For the answer, there is some slight change, is also, therefore, gender different. Has the volume of housework increased? Well, more women report that than men. And then if we talk about care work specifically, because of the pandemic, women report an increase in care work. 31% of women report that, and only 13% of men report that. And that's something you see throughout the survey, this clear difference between how men perceive reality and how women do. It's not just a matter of perception, probably. It's probably a matter of how responsibilities are shared and allocated and who ends up doing the work. You know, when both members of the couple are sharing the housework, men report that it's shared by both in 30% of cases, and women report that in 56% of cases. That's interesting because it seems to contradict everything I've reported to you. But less than 1% of men report doing housework alone, and a very high, much higher percentage of women report doing housework alone. And here we go into the debate of how you gauge how much you're doing, how much of the responsibility you're shouldering. And this all has to do with and the idea of whether you're helping out at home. It's in other words, the perception of ownership of certain tasks. Is this my job or not? And all of that is very much patriarchal. We just haven't managed to disrupt that pattern according to which men help out at home when they're doing that. Now, if we look at weekly hours spent on this kind of work during lockdown, women report over 10 hours a week. 8% of women report over 10 hours a week. Only 2% of men report that. Less than 5 hours are reported by 17% of men and 25% of women. So that's 1/3 of women. Men are half of that. So we see this pattern over and over again. Another interesting finding in this survey, well, the survey provides an early snapshot. I think we need to do some qualitative research into that in the future, because depending on how you ask about the sharing of work, depending on what adjective you use, what is reported and the percentage of time allocation and the percentage of breakdown reported are different. We used 3 different concepts in our questions. Shared responsibility. Is the responsibility shared? Is there egalitarian sharing of the work? And is there a perception that both contribute equally? You know, when you ask about contributing equally, about collaborative work. There's a low percentage of people who report that there is never collaborative housework. But, you know, in other words, what we find is that the perception is that most of the housework is done by women, and then men devote whatever time is left by their paid work and leisure and other things to help out with the housework. And of course, there are lots of indicators that tell us about all this. At one point, the survey asks the following question: who is in charge of children? Not about regular, biological care, as it were. Who is in charge of the children's homework, of supervising homework or schoolwork? During lockdown, schools were closed, so the children were not just locked down with their parents. And here I'd just like to remind you that this is a survey of households where both parents were working in paid employment. And so if you ask the question about who's in charge of children's schoolwork, only 4.5% of men report that, meaning me alone, that they do it alone. In the case of women, it's 18.14% who report they're solely in charge. No, for the answer, it's my partner. Women respondents referred to and referred to their male partners, because we filtered out here we filtered out same-sex respondents. So women reporting that their partners were solely in charge were about 3%, men 6%. So once again, we find that we women are gifting our time to the family. First of all, to the men. Men don't take up their share of responsibility, even at an exceptional time, even at times that have locked us within the home and forced us to face all of the work, or at least live with all of the work that needs to be done for housework and care work. But aside from all the kinds of self-questioning and self-challenging, or despite all the self-challenging characteristics of the pandemic, the fact is that the allocation of work has remained according to the typical patterns. Men do not accept the kind of work that they should be doing. It's not that they should be helping out. The fact is that they've never taken ownership of care work, of domestic work and housework. And interestingly, one of the questions was, has this lockdown situation led you to reconsider time or how you organize your time? Interestingly, many men and women reported that they wanted to spend more time with their family. That was found for both genders. But of course, we need to find out what kind of time people want to spend more of with their family. Does that include only quality time, or does it also include housework and care work, which is also a way of spending time with the family, and not necessarily a bad one, next to leisure and education and all sorts of other things. The point is how it's done, and doing it as a shared responsibility, not as a duty for women and a choice according to convenience for men. So going back to our initial research question, has lockdown led us to some kind of change in terms of gender distribution of work, of housework? Well, the answer is no, which means that if we do not start to really value and display the value of household work and care work, everything that's about caring for the people that you're living with, it's going to be very, very difficult to disrupt that gender pattern, however many pandemics and exceptional situations may occur. I don't know whether I've managed to stick to the time. Yes, thank you, Christina. Since you're here with us, I have a question for you. I thought it was really interesting to hear about the survey findings. But there's one particular point that I find of great interest, beyond all the data you've presented. I really would like to know whether there's a bit of room for hope, a glimmer of hope. You said 85%, I think it was, of men reported nothing had changed in terms of household and care work allocation within the home, which means that a very significant percentage did report some change. Now, I agree with you that this pandemic is not going to magically vanish away or problems in society, and particularly not this one. But my question is whether in your research you have found any kind of evidence of perhaps greater engagement, greater involvement. Have men and women perhaps enjoyed the time spent with their family? I mean, I play with my daughter every afternoon, no matter what, but I did enjoy having a little more time to enjoy with my daughter. So have you found any evidence of the possibility of changing one's relationship to one's children and to household work? I don't know if that's clear. Yes, it's very clear. There is some evidence of that. It's very tiny. It's there, but it's tiny. The problem is that it's so tiny, it's not really structural. I think you've described it very well. People have started looking at time differently and valuing the time spent with their families. But it's still a problem to see that the type and amount of time spent with the family is very different between the two members of the couple. We're talking about heterosexual couples here, but we don't have, because we don't have the right kind of sample size for differences in other kinds of couples. So, and there are changes, but there are changes especially in terms of owning the threshold of responsibility from the perspective of discourse, but not from the perspective of action. A silly example that's not linked to the pandemic, but it's a very good example. Men are wearing more pink shirts and they're speaking more progressively about equality than they're actually spending time working in housework and care work at home, in the home. Because women's work is not just to support ourselves. We're supporting ourselves, our partner, and every member of the household. That is the time that we are gifting. That is the time that we are offering the other members of the household. In this different way of viewing the family, if we had an egalitarian community in the family, everybody would be contributing the same amount of time. Not just the enjoyable bits, not just storytelling to children or playing soccer in the living room because we can't leave the house, but also just for what you need for maintenance, life maintenance, maintaining life, but not just maintaining life, supervising or helping out with homework. I mean, that particular figure is quite striking. When both parents were working from home, it was overwhelmingly the mothers who were doing the work of overseeing their children's schoolwork. schoolwork, then and we're talking about women who were working, either telecommuting or working as essential workers, considering what working hours were for essential workers too. Bear that in mind, because we all know what happened to telecommuting in terms of hours of work, and also what happened in terms of essential workers. Basically, we've been spending more time at work.
Great, Christina. Thank you. You gave me an exact answer to what I was asking. That's great then.
So related with this that we were talking with Christina, I have a question for Till, and it's that if in the study you've found any evidence of differences regarding sleep patterns, or how the pandemic has affected our sleep habits, our social jet lag in between men and women. I don't know if this is something that was analyzed in the study.
Well, of course, we analyze the difference between men and women, but it's not that big. We found a much more important, not that the difference between women isn't important, but it didn't show a big difference. But what showed a big difference is different countries that had different forms of lockdown. Now, those countries that had lockdown where they allowed people to go for walks outside, showed a much better sleep and a higher well-being than in those countries where everybody was locked down inside. So we had the advantage of different countries having different ways of lockdown, and therefore we were able to explore the differences. And if we go into another lockdown or for any future lockdown, I would definitely say if you wear a mask but go outside during the daylight, then it will be very beneficial for health, and it will not necessarily make the pandemic worse.
Thank you very much, Till. I absolutely agree. So in this second wave that we're living right now, I mean, I think that everything is different. At least in Spain, schools are open, so this makes a huge difference. And then the fact of being able to go outside, or once we were able to go outside walking, that made a huge difference. So I actually agree with you completely.
May I say something?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Nothing related to biological timing. We have to be aware that it has been said throughout this session that the pandemic, that the virus has changed our lives, and that is not true. The virus has not changed our lives. Something much more positive has changed our lives, and that is the species responsibility we have to make sure that not everybody is getting sick. That's what changed our lives, not the virus. We have to really envision that it's us with our empathy towards people who might be sick or die that has changed our lives, and that's a much better outlook than saying COVID has changed our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I think I'm going to say that from now on, because it's much more, yeah, it's much more true, and
it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's actually wonderful. It's prettier. It's more, I don't know how to say in English, but it's actually in some cases changed our lives. It's hard to say this given the people that are getting sick and people that are dying, but in some ways it's had positive effects. And this is, I wanted to ask. Exactly, many positive effects. I wanted to ask one last question to all of you related with this, what I'm saying. Do you think, so what changes do you think are positive? What changes do you think will last if we ever get over this? And then are these two the same? So the ones that are positive, do you think that are the ones that will last? Or regrettably, the ones that will last will be ones that are not so positive? I know it's like a very big question and very complex, but just in like 1 minute, each and every one. So what is your point of view from the different studies that you have explained and that you have the results of the research that you have explained today?
And I'll
I don't know, whoever.
Sí, en el meu cas, si voleu, començo jo, i perquè vull afegir un...
I would like to add something to what Till was just saying. It is true that there are positive experiences, but there have also been many negative experiences. So not everyone has lived through the same kind of pandemic, and it depends on how it has impacted every single case. But in general terms, regarding time use, there has been quite an important progress because people have reflected upon this social time organization that is different now. And I believe that this is something that is here maybe not to stay, but it will keep offering new questions to citizens about what kind of things they have tried or they have seen, they have anticipated, and I believe that they want to keep that in the future. So things that were unthinkable in the past, such as having dinner earlier, or having dinner the whole family together, or using your time differently. Now, these kind of things were impossible to imagine and to implement in your day-to-day, whereas right now it's a reality. And having lived through this, both adults and young children, this should help us, should give way to an important change. We'll see how it evolves. Now, the topic that I've tackled today, which is the distribution of family time and home-related chores, has meant that people now pay more attention to being on autopilot in terms of distributing roles that we have learned from others that have been instilled on us structurally. And I think that people will think about this differently from now on. There are many dynamics that hide this kind of unfair, unequal distribution of tasks. We're fraught with stereotypes. So we tend to say, oh, I get home earlier, or it's easier for me to do such and such. Whereas right now, everybody, and by everybody I mean most people, are at home. We're under the same conditions, or at least comparable conditions. So it's harder to avoid having a new pact amongst the two partners in a family, because it's shared responsibilities. And I believe that the fact that children were at home with all the educational duty involved, and not only having them there, but having to present results and tasks to the school, I'm sure that many couples have discussed about them and have thought about them, and mostly women have a new stance about this in their own household. And maybe they have realized, at least for men, I'm sure that they've been shocked, but now they know that some of these changes have to stay.
I don't know if maybe Till or Daphne or Laura, do you want to? Daphne, go ahead.
Yes. I unfortunately don't understand everything Christina says, but I think I agree with a lot of the things she says. That sounds funny, even if I don't understand it, but some of the words that I picked up, I thought, yes, this is true. I like to look at the situation from the glass being half full, but I think the important thing here, if I take what Till says from a biological perspective, and it's an opportunity for positive change, then what my task is in my job is to ensure that then also applies to everyone across the board. And I think that's where the situation might be more challenging, that the extent to which we have freedom of choice in how we plan our time, in the opportunities to rest, depends on our social situation, on our, what I already said, not only our household composition, but also on the type of job that we do. And I think there's a risk here that if you look at who was able to telework, and then irrespective of whether that experience was good or bad, but that first of all, the choice that you could telework. So if I take myself, I was able to telework. It enabled me, first of all, it secured my income, so I didn't have to worry about that. And then it was up to me to apply some of the skills that Laura was talking about. And even there, I think there's a important task to make sure that people are then given these skills and know how to do some of these things to manage their time well. So I think we have quite a lot of work to do if this becomes our new reality, to ensure that it applies across the board and that it's fair. That I'm a bit worried that this creates a bigger divide between those in more privileged positions and those that don't have that luxury. But that's from a social research position and not from a biological.
Since biology was mentioned, maybe I should continue here. I totally agree, but I have to tell you that I don't think that what you're looking at is not biology. It's just looking at biology from sort of a different perspective and not from the basic biology of genes and biochemistry and physiology. But everything that concerns us as human beings is in some way biology. And if biology doesn't come in, we can't deal with it. Or if we deal with it, we deal with it in the wrong way. I totally agree with you, but I would say that what has happened just now has been a jump in a very slow development that was going in that direction anyhow. So we suddenly have jumped from the situation we were in at the beginning of this year to what we would have come into maybe in the 2030s, where many people would have worked from home. That is excellent, because if you have a slow slope, you're not reacting, you're just adapting without thinking about it. If you have an abrupt slope, suddenly you're confronted with things concerning women, children, housing, and internet, and schooling and opportunities. And I totally agree with you. One of our major tasks is to keep these positive things, is to be aware that the people who have the biggest advantage are the privileged people already. And the task of that group of people in the population is to make sure that every part of this population gets advantages from this very actively. And then we can sort of tap ourselves on the shoulder and say, we've done the best with the situation. But only then, if we as privileged people just love to work from, as I do, from my farm, we have changed nothing and we have learned nothing. So I totally agree with you.
Perfect. Laura, I don't know if you want to.
Sure. I was just
go ahead. Perfect.
So, I mean, I like all the answers that have been given already, so I'm not gonna repeat that. What I'm gonna say, I think on the positive side, there are like at least two positives from my perspective. The first one is the realization that people can work from home and you don't need to have them in the office monitoring them, that they need to sit on the chair to make sure that they're actually working, which is, you know, actually counterproductive. And the second positive change is kind of putting well-being on the agenda and not just productivity, and the realization that well-being is of value to companies and that they need to, moving forward, have a discussion about it, because yes, it's a soft skill, if you may, but it is one of the mechanisms through which productivity is enhanced. And I think it has been brought up by this forced remote working from home and the current situation. And to Till's point, I think a lot of companies have been forced to innovate almost overnight, and they realized that things that they thought they couldn't do, they actually were able to do right away. Things that they were postponing and dealing with for months and years and saying, we absolutely cannot work from home. All of a sudden, everybody could work from home because they were forced to do that. And then I think the second question was on long-lasting changes and what kind of changes are we going to see? And I think definitely what I'm hearing, and it'll be interesting to see what actually happens, but people don't want to go back 5 days a week to the office. I think we're going to be seeing a hybrid work workplace in the future, my question and the challenge that I think we're going to be dealing with is we've seen a lot of policy change as a reactive way, as now everybody will work from home, enforcing policies without real evidence of what are the positive and the negative consequences of having this kind of policies, because there will be both. So we need evidence before actually enforcing such policies long term. So yeah, that's broadly, I think, my thoughts on the question. I think there was a third one, if you don't mind repeating it, if I missed it.
But I think you actually answered it, what the positive effects would be and the lasting effects, and then if they coincide, if they are the same. That was... Sí, Cristina, endavant.
Sí, des de, o sigui, el tema del...
Regarding telecommuting, well, this is extremely important as well. I believe that it's here to stay, and I agree with what has been said. However, from the point of view of what I was saying, how to distribute home chores and tasks, it is extremely important to think that this shouldn't be just a makeshift solution for women to strike a balance between work and life. This is quite a risk, the way I see it. It would be an undesired collateral damage. I tend to explain the same thing. In Catalan textile factories, women brought their work home. It's not that they decided, they were given tasks to carry out at home. And obviously it had disastrous effects for their personal life and for work-life balance. So the danger now is that technology renders telework more attractive if we don't plan ahead, if we know exactly where one thing ends and the other one begins, what the workplace is and working time and your own personal time. This shouldn't be an excuse or a pretext. I think that this is a social responsibility and this wouldn't be the way forward. I hope this makes sense.
Cristina.
It does, Cristina. Thank you.
So, closing arguments for the session, I would like to highlight how the session has been extremely interesting, not only because each and every one of the studies were interesting in itself, but because I think it has been very enriching to have such an exchange of knowledge from different perspectives and different scientific disciplines. And with the minute that we have remaining, I would like to ask you for one sentence. How do you think we could promote in next year's Time Use Week? How could we promote this exchange between different, the exchange the exchange of knowledge between different scientific disciplines? How can we guarantee that we are telling the story from all the different parts, from all the different perspectives, so as to get the complete story?
No sé si t'he entès. Vale.
Let me say it in Catalan. Cristina, com podem garantir...
How can we ensure for the next Time Use Week this kind of exchange amongst different disciplines and different fields of study? Just like we've done with this session, how can we tell the story from different viewpoints?
Cristina, endavant.
No.
I didn't mean to be the first to speak. It's just that I wasn't sure I'd understood that. I'm not sure how we can ensure that, but I know that what we've done today is extremely important because I believe that we've all paid a lot of attention to what every other colleague was saying. And this has been the case for the whole week, because in order to understand a phenomenon like this one, you cannot just learn this from one discipline. I believe that what I'm interested in, distribution of home chores and work, is extremely important, but it's better to have a broad picture of what's going on by listening to different people. And I believe that for the next edition of this Time Use Week, we need all of these not to be just a discussion amongst ourselves. I know it's not, I know it's open to the public, but we need to keep talking, discussing this with our fellow citizens. So all of this knowledge that we hold from all of our different viewpoints that are very cross-cutting in nature, that can be extremely interesting from many different viewpoints, these should not be sheer information, but real knowledge for citizens, because they need to implement this in their lives. Otherwise, we won't get better living conditions.
Thank you, Christina. Till, did you have did you raise your hands, I thought, or?
Yes, but I never know what Christina's. I don't know. I don't understand Catalan, and therefore I just don't know what people say. And I think it's very important that we all understand each other, which is one of the prerequisites of working together in different disciplines and languages. But I think we have to keep up initiatives like the Time Use Society so that we can actively get people from different disciplines together and show them how undifferent they actually are in their goals, and fuse the approaches that they use, because it's not all looking for molecules. It's mainly looking for behavior and concepts. Molecules are just the implementation of biology of concepts that are successful, and therefore we have to strengthen conceptual science again, and understand that we need the implementation science when we want to develop drugs, and when we really want to understand or think to understand what a mechanism in the body is responsible for implementing a concept that we have understood. But understanding concepts is much more important for changing politics than understanding the underlying molecular mechanisms.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you very much. I don't know if Daphne or yeah, go ahead. Don't.
I think it's a really challenging question, right? Like how do we make sure that we speak with all the different, like the interdisciplinary research and speaking beyond our comfort zone? I think it's a really challenging, and as Till said, making sure that such initiatives like the Time Use Society exists, it's a great first step. And I think in one sentence, if I were to say this, and I've been thinking about this for a while, is reach out outside your comfort zone. Try to read and interact with people that you don't necessarily disagree with or that you don't really understand, to get their perspective, because that's, I think, the first step to solving any differences is to understand and recognize that they are differences, and speaking to the people that are having those differences from you.
Thank you, Laura.
Maybe I can add.
Yeah, perfect.
Just
yes.
to say, yes. So I think you've done a fantastic job. You've taken me out of not so much my comfort zone, but my assumptions. So I really appreciated this opportunity to talk together with different people. I shall learn Catalan for the next time. That's a little joke, but I had never really thought so much about the biological aspect. So I'm very sort of silo thinker in my little social policy world. So I very much appreciate what Till said, and it certainly changed my way of thinking. And hopefully that will last. I don't know how good my biology is to allow me to maintain that, but
Daphne, I make a proposal. Let's meet via Zoom with a glass of wine and have a couple of very casual discussions, the two of us.
I would love that.
Regularly, very regularly, once a month or something like that. I think this is extremely important that the two disciplines we represent first understand their differences and then their common grounds.
Thank you. Deal. And I think I think that's a very nice way to end this at least our chat, that I think that's what you, in organizing this group, have done. So when you asked us to think about how you should do it next time, I would say do this again and bring together different people from different disciplines and also from different experiences country-wise. So yeah, congratulations. That's all I can say. And thank you for allowing us to participate.
Thank you.
Can I
Thank you
add
very
as well?
much.
I think,
yeah.
Just wanted to add that I think if we were to look at the positives as well of the current situation, is that it allowed us to connect on a much broader level because we're virtual and we don't have to travel, which means that you can actually connect with a lot of individuals and groups that you would normally not interact with. So I think that's a definite positive moving forward. So thank you so much.
Yes, I agree with everything you said. So thank you very much for your time, for your availability, for sharing your knowledge, your research. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here in this 7th Times Use Week, and hopefully, yeah, we will repeat it next year, and hopefully we can replicate this debate. With, I agree with you, has been very, very interesting and enriching. So thank you very much to all 4 of you. Just before closing, quick reminder to the audience that at 11 we have another session dedicated to time use on the Catalan research ecosystem. So thank you very much again to the speakers. It has been a pleasure. Thanks.
Gràcies.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.